So there's a lot of differences with sailing with your typical 20, 30 boat fleet compared to sailing with 60 boats on the line, because if you think about it, the race committee has to set a much longer starting line, and in doing so, it actually shortens your tactical options on the course a lot. You're only going to have limited room to roam out to the left or right side of the course. So all that has to be kept in mind when we kind of formulate our strategies before the start. So typically what we do on a big boat fleet is we go out just as we would with a small boat fleet, and we're checking for wind. We're checking what the lifts look like with land sights on the lake, the headers. We're trying to figure out the wind pattern out on the water. What we're also doing is we're thinking about our strategy when it comes to the start. So what we're trying to do is not really leverage up to one end or the other unless you have an extremely favored end with a bias on the starting line. What we want to do is positionally sail the weather leg a lot more than to commit to a singular strategy. And what that means, I'm going to go ahead and go over the main points here for a minute, but then I'm going to actually draw this up and describe exactly what we're talking about with that. So if we look at starting here, we obviously want to check the end, and we don't want to give away distance based on the bias of the line. So you do want to be at the favored end like normal, but I'll show you the difference in strategy. Like I said, we have limited tactical options up the first beat because there's so many boats. You're not going to be able to start at, let's say, the pin and go right because you're going to be ducking like 40 boats. You want to figure out the first shift, and a lot of times that's figuring out the trends before the race. And then finally, we're going to be dealing with line sag and big time clear air issues in traffic at the favored ends. So I'll go ahead and drop this down. And what we have here is kind of a mock starting line. And what I'm going to do is go over a few permutations of what we may see out there on the race course during the regatta. So first thing, I drew pretty much your starting line here. And if the wind is kind of dead center on the starting line, everything equal, you're probably going to want to shift to a strategy where you're trying to anticipate that first incoming shift and really focus on pressure up the beat. So what we normally do in about 2 minutes is we're checking the line constantly, even in sequence, and we're scanning. We actually stand up, look out on the water, and see if we can see anything incoming down the course. So let's say, for example, course is square, but we see a nice puff coming in from the right side. If you think about your strategy play here, you're probably going to want to be somewhere up at the boat end, because as the wind shifts, the guys at the boat end are going to wind up on starboard compared to the pin end. But again, like we were saying, you're going to hit ley line pretty quickly if you start all the way at the boat. So a lot of times we're taking advantage of the line sag. What you'll have is a bunch of boats lined up at the boat end, and then as you come down the line, these boats will actually be further and further away from the line, and I'm drawing this out evenly just to make the point. But what you tend to get is, because we're not using GPS and compasses to ping the lines and know exactly how far we are away from the line, we kind of have to rely on land sights. And if there's, let's say, a U flag or even a round the end flag up, you're going to want to be conservative and not push the line, so a lot of times you get a natural line sag forming. Now this opens up a lot of good opportunities right here at the favored end and right where the line sag starts to form to start. So if you think about your strategy here, if you're here all the way at the boat end, you're still going to be advantaged on that right shift compared to everybody else further on down the line. Everyone gets that, what I'm kind of drawing there? And then you're also, because you're not so pinned out to one side here, you're going to have tactical options, not just that first righty coming in, but probably subsequent shifts further up the beat. You're going to have a more diverse strategy based on where you decided to start. So what I'm saying in all of this is there's probably 50 different permutations of what can happen on the starting line. What we're doing is getting you in the mindset of kind of reverse engineering what's going on the first beat, how you take observations, and how you want to plan out where you want to be, okay? How many of you guys actually do this? Raise your hands if you kind of go through the so very few. So this is a good thing. Today in the clinic, I'm going to set the line pretty generously to try to mimic what we're going to see in the races over the weekend here. So I'm going to set pretty much an extra long line to where it's going to really limit those options out on the sides tactically. Okay? So with this line sag, we really like to use this in big boat fleets. And let's say we kind of redraw this where we don't have a right shift, but now the wind is equal and you really can't pick up on anything upwind. A lot of times, I don't know if Jeff's in the room, but a lot of people end up starting somewhere here in the middle instead of at the ends, because they're going to rely more on their boat speed and their ability to pick off shifts up the beat to beat the guys that will outright win the start right at the gun. The lake is very shifty out here, so a lot of times what is favored at like the gun ends up not paying up the beat. So we employ that strategy a lot. The other thing we do on the start is we geographically kind of want to be somewhere, like if we were to divide the line into thirds, we want to operate in this area all the way down to 2 minutes, because it allows us flexibility to either cycle to the pin or back to the boat based on any trend. Things can change very quickly here out on the lake. So let's say the pin end's looking really good at 5 minutes, everyone packs down here to the pin end, suddenly it goes back the other way. You're not going to have time to actually sail back. You're going to be committed at that point. So what we're trying to do here by staying central to the line is so big, we just don't have time to go from one end to the other. We're leaving our options open until that last possible minute where we commit to our strategy. Very big and very successful in these bigger fleets. Does anyone have any questions about that? Because it's very unconventional to loiter in the middle of the starting line and then really try to figure out under 2 minutes exactly where you want to be. Most people set up.
About how long do you think the line will be with 60 boats?
I don't know, Ray, what do you think? A good half-mile long?
Oh.
How long do you think they're going to set the starting line to accommodate the fleet size? Yeah. So that's definitely what we kind of do here on the start time and time again. And obviously you're using your land sights on the lake to figure out if you want to stay on starboard or go to port. You definitely don't want to take those headers upwind out here in the lake because it tends to cycle back. One header, if you take it too long, is going to lead to another header coming back. So kind of connect the dots if you can upwind. Trying to think of anything geography-wise out of the south or southeast that's going to affect the lake. We do have a little bit of a point over off downtown. As you come around, there's a little bit of a cove. If we were racing, not today in the clinic, but out at the regatta, that would probably come into effect a little bit on the point, affecting the way the wind bends around it. So you also want to kind of take that into your strategy a little for the first beat. So starting in the big fleets is kind of a learned thing. You're going to have to definitely put in the reps today to become comfortable with some of these strategy changes and see if you can figure out the time and distance. We really like using line sights as much as possible, but the one other way to do it is if you poke your nose out, a lot of times you can actually see the sag a little. So don't be afraid to not just punch out, but come forward enough to where you can actually see the line and see what's going on. Obviously, if you think everyone's pushing the line and there's a big bulge and maybe a penalty flag up, kind of stay pat. But a lot of times we peek out and see if we can see what's going on, and that really kind of plays into how we pull the trigger with less than 15 seconds to go. If you're down here in the sag and you know everyone's off the line, a lot of times you can pull the trigger 20, 30 seconds before the gun, and you're still not going to be over. I've seen a lot of people at World Championships have very successful races because they're actually 2-3 volt lengths ahead of the sag, and they sail the entire first beat in almost clear air. Even the guys that win the ends are going to have to deal with traffic. So try doing it today in practice, see how it works out. We will be calling the line fairly, so if you're over, just come on back. We're going to not do any like black flagger around the ends.
Do you plan to put a midline buoy?
Nope. You got to be good with it. That's kind of unfair.
The experience I've been that we have tried.
Can't hear you.
Not me personally, but I've been on the line, in the middle line boat, right?
Yeah, they'll have a pin and a start boat.
It will be a motorboat with the orange flag. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what happens? We report it back to the.
So our starting discussion kind of parlays here into what's going to happen further up the course. If you think about it, you have to judge whether you're up front or kind of middle pack or in the back, because there's a difference in how you can play the weather leg in all three positions. So I'm going to erase this, and we're going to kind of draw the course with the start here. So same thing, let's say we've got our weather, our offset, our gate, and then even though this is shrunken down a lot here, our starting line down here with our two boats. Okay, so as we sail up the beat, if you're kind of up front, you can use the entire course. You can go left ley line, you can go right ley line, you could stay up the middle because you're not constrained by what's about to happen at the weather mark. Now, if you think you're somewhere in the middle of the pack, there's actually very good opportunities to pass a lot of boats because of what's going to happen with the traffic. If you think about it, with 50 boats coming in at a weather mark, let's say you have a pack in the mid fleet of about 30 of them, you're going to have your port ley line over here, kind of draw that in, and your starboard ley line, sorry if my geometry isn't perfect here, over here. So you're going to have a giant area of no wind as soon as those lead boats round. So if you're coming in on port ley line here, your options get really, really bad if you're all the way on ley line. You come in, you're not only going to have to sail through the bad air, but you're also going to have a wall of starboard boats coming in. And the tempting thing to do is to short tack somebody, lee bow them, and try to squeeze around the mark. However, what happens when you don't make it? You basically can lose 20 boats easily by making the mistake of getting into that washing machine at the weather mark in these big fleets. We've seen guys go like an Optimist where you've got 150 boats at a weather mark. We've seen guys go from top 10, top 20, all the way to 80th. And the punishment is pretty bad because your only option literally is to jibe around, clear out, and then get out onto the starboard ley line. You almost want to give up if you find yourself in that situation. You just want to bail on that strategy. Don't even attempt to tack back and tack again because you're just going to get sideways into the mark again and not get out of there. So the best thing to actually do is to reach off, jibe around, and take your lumps. Now, strategy-wise here, and we're talking about the port ley line for a minute, if you're not in the top 10, you actually want to kind of create, let's say our 3 bolt length circles here. You want to create a good distance of at least 100 yards and create what we call a false ley line. You do not want to come into this left zone from there. And in doing so, you're going to have very good options coming in because the guys that make this mistake, you're probably going to pass, right? Guys that come in and lee bow on starboard, you're probably going to pass. So as you're coming across on port, let's say someone calls starboard. Do you tack and lee bow or do you duck them? Think about it for a second. Because you can't go into this area over here, if you have anyone that you're facing on starboard and you're already on this false ley line, duck them. Because now they're going into this area, which you're probably going to pass them, right? So do not lee bow a starboard boat when you're coming in on this false ley line. It's a very smart tactical move because they're putting themselves in the position that you're trying to avoid. Now, as we start to think about this, if you come in at a lower rung here on the ladder, your options are probably going to open up a lot on the starboard ley line there. So you're going to be able to really judge your starboard ley line, whether you can do it really tight if you're not going to be covered a lot, or if you think you're going to get some sort of coverage coming in on starboard, come out a bolt length or two. Try not to go too far over the ley line because you're sailing extra distance, but it's better than getting into traffic and in this grinder going on. So we really look at things like that, where if you're mid-pack, you definitely want to judge, okay, what do I want to avoid here at the weather mark? And it's this zone, and it's actually short standing the ley line here. You want to give yourself 1 to 2 bolt lengths. So if I were to draw it here, just 1 to 2. off of the ley line there to give yourself a little bit of kind of leeway there in case somebody comes out or a bunch of people come out and cover you right away. One thing about what we know about sailing the Scot is it has different modes. What is your best pointing mode? If you think about it, is it dead flat or with a little bit of heel, like 7 to 10 degrees? I think it's 7 to 10. So as you're getting into a covered situation where you're out here, a lot of times it's best, instead of trying to just sail the boat flat, be conscious of your pressure in your rig, put the boat on that heel and allow it to point as much as possible, because if you're kind of borderline on ley line, it's better to go into that high mode and maybe lose a little boat speed than to not make the mark and have to do 2 extra tacks.
Yeah.
It's the lesser of 2 evils. So a lot of times in these situations, think about what mode you could sail the boat in to solve that problem of where you are positionally on the ley line. So as we talk about ley lines here, one of the final things we have to do coming around is determine whether we want to set or jibe set. Do we want to go pressure high, pressure low? Typically what we do is we want to make that call in the last 100 yards or less of the weather mark, especially on a shifty lake. If you make the call too far out, the shift can come in, and what you saw at 250 yards out might be the wrong tactical call at the weather mark. A lot of times it's even good to make that call between weather and offset. However, we have a problem in mid-fleet. Can you jibe set with this much bad air? Now what's interesting is if you're in the back of the pack, that tactical option is open. So if you're in the bottom 25% of boats, you can straight set, jibe set, and not worry about that bad air. So that's a good passing opportunity. If you think about it, if you're mega lifted on starboard coming around weather, a lot of times if you're in the pack, you have to sail till your air is clear before you can jibe onto that header on port. However, if you're a little further behind, you can come in and sneak into that lane right away and actually pass a lot of boats on the run, because you're going to be on that header sooner than the boats that are forced to sail out further because of the bad air. It's a big mistake to jibe right away into this, because you're going to lose compared to these guys on speed, and I don't think you're going to get out of here quick enough to finally get into the header. So it's a lose-lose situation if you do a jibe set when there's too much bad air in this like cone of death here going on. So everyone kind of knows how to make calls at weather marks. Like if you're lifted, you typically want a jibe set. If you're headed, just straight set, and you're on the header already. So just keep that in mind. And then on the lake, we've seen pressure differences. You look out every 10 feet, it seems like there's a puff or a lull. You really do have to read where the pressure is coming from. That's a high or low. Do you drive the boat low, or do you kind of sail until you get to the wind and then drive it down? We kind of find that sailing to the pressure out in the lake is a little more effective than letting it come to you. Okay, that puff isn't guaranteed to make it to you. So a lot of times you might want to stay in a hot mode to get to the pressure and then sail deeper once you're in the pressure. Tactics aside, a lot of times we find that faster. So does everyone remember from beginning sailing, up in the puffs, down in the lulls? Everyone's heard that before? It really probably applies on the lake more than like what you would do in a bay. So you want to exaggerate that a little bit. Don't be afraid to sail a little hot until you get to that pressure. I think that's a good thing. Does anyone have any question about weather marks here and kind of what we're talking about with the ley lines? I'll go all the way back to the start for one moment. If we have this giant start, how easy it is if you started at boat to be forced out to ley line, especially if you're not in the lead. And now we're seeing back to our starting strategy, how kind of being all the way at the end can be a very high risk, high reward strategy. Obviously, if the right side's favored here, you can pass a ton of boats, but if you're wrong, you're gonna get ley line quick, and the entire fleet's gonna tack on you, and you're not gonna have any options. You're gonna be dusted. Probably a really bad race. So we try to avoid these singular strategies in big fleets. They don't pay. You don't want to be pinned and be forced left. You don't want to be bowed and forced right. So pre-start, who likes to kind of be outside of the ley line on starboard to sneak in right at the boat? We see it all the time in racing, right? I dare you to do it. The thing that will probably happen is you'll be forced into this, especially if you don't end up being the boat there at the boat end if it's favored. So it's kind of interesting to watch what happens before the start. You've got to think out the game a couple moves ahead in the big fleets here. I would stay I would never be outside of the ley line here before the start in a big boat fleet, even if the boat end was really favored. Just because you're going to be forced into this singular strategy, pretty much banging the right corner.
Did you just touch on the barging rule?
Sure. So if you think about it, pre-start.
I think good question.
Yeah. He said, what do you think about the barging?
Well, I'm just saying the barging rule.
Yeah.
I think at what point, you
So
can yell protest all you want, but there's a time that it doesn't,
So the rule there is pretty much a lured boat can go head to wind. So if they can go head to wind and put their bow right on the starting boat, no boats can go in there, okay? So what we kind of like to do here is if you drew a false ley line, another one back from the boat, if you're above this on starboard, you're going to be barging, especially with 60 boats. I guarantee you there's going to be no circumstance where the boat end's favored and there won't be anyone there. There's going to be a crowd of boats there. So what we like to do actually is if we're going to want to really start aggressively at the boat again, we will come down and kind of line up off this ley line because everyone's going to be heading themselves up and crawling toward that ley line. So if you're going to do this, you probably want to come in and set up somewhere in that region versus going all the way to ley line because you know you're going to get caught in the pileup. So one more thing about kind of roundings and everything is you have to anticipate not just one boat barging, but like 5. So just like at a leeward mark, have you ever seen someone try to shut the door and 5 boats are trying to go in there? Does anyone win in that situation? I think that's kind of what you're alluding to. At some point, is it better off just to let them have it and kind of don't shut the door on them, or do you shut the door? Because I know most people shut the door. But my thoughts on that are just don't even get into it. Like if we find ourselves there, we've made a critical strategy error. Further,
there's no human nature.
Yeah.
They may not have the right to be in there, but they're going in anyway. Because it's like a dog feed the dog. They're gonna get down on the chow. They're coming in.
So a little intimidation goes a long way, and a lot of times if you yell at someone early enough, they'll back off because they know they're wrong. So if you don't say anything and you kind of let them go in there, you're not really defending your position. It's like hailing someone on starboard. A lot of times PJ is very vocal at the start, where if we see someone trying it, it's better to yell at them and get them to back off verbally than to get into a situation where you both are going to lose.
Some race days may trail a mark to keep you from getting the boat.
And Ray, are you going to do that? Are you going to trail a mark off? Are you going to trail a buoy off the committee boat to keep people from barging?
Hitting the boat.
That's it. Well,
We're not planning on doing that.
you might want to do that.
I know that if you need to committee board, you will get killed.
Yeah.
That's not the point.
But we'll discuss it, we'll ask that again at the speakers meeting.
Yeah, we could talk about it, and I think it's a smart idea. I've seen it in a lot of the bigger boat fleets like J70. They're starting to do that because it just keeps people from banging up their boats and having to do boat work at the end of the day. Good question, though. Anyone else have a question about the start and first beat? Cool. So I'm going to start to advance on the race course now down to the leeward gate. And I'll kind of switch off. I'll redraw this. We can check our time. We're good. So a couple big bullet points about the leeward is let's discuss a little bit about how to pick the proper gate, right gate. How do you not get pinwheeled to the outside? Does everyone know what that means? Okay. And then finally, 3 boat lengths in room come into play, especially when you have 5 boats overlapped. So I'll even start there. If there are 5 boats overlapped and you're all the way on the outside, If you let those boats round and you finally come upwind, do you not have to give room because you're not inside 3 boat lengths to someone else coming downwind because now there is an overlap. One boat is a beam exposing themselves to that room. So to kind of draw this up, and I'll do it down here and then erase it, if I've got my gate, a 3 boat length circle, if I'm more than 3 boats wide out here, I actually can't shut the door on anyone, okay? If I round up and someone's coming in here and they're hailing room, I probably have to give it to them. So the mistake, and this is what we're gonna talk about setting up your lure gate properly, is if you have more than 3 boats to the inside of you, you've gotta slow your boat down. You've gotta break that overlap and get behind them. That way you're gonna be able to protect the inside and not have to give away room to boats coming in from behind. Now we see this all the time where this guy out here doesn't know that he's outside 3 boat lengths. So he'll shut the door hard. However, he's gonna get thrown out, okay? He or she will be thrown out. And the main reason is even if you are right, and let's say you're inside 3 boat lengths, you can't shut the door because you're causing a collision. You have to give them room and then protest them. And then you have to prove that they didn't have room, or they have to prove that they did. Either way, you want to avoid that situation by noticing how many boats potentially are overlapped on you compared to where you are at the mark. You want to stay out of that situation. And this kind of goes back to our 3 main bullet points here is, how do you pick the right gate? Well, typically, you want to pick the most upwind gate regardless of what it is. However, in a big fleet, you may want to give away a boat length or 2 based on where you want to go, sides of the course, and the amount of traffic. So if I see 15 boats going to one gate, obvious passing opportunity is to go to the other gate if there's less traffic. Those 15 boats are all going to slow each other down. Someone's going to get pinwheeled to the outside, and unless it's the favored way to go, you're probably going to pass 5, 7, maybe even 10 out of the 15 boats that are all piling up on each other. So when we sail downwind, and I'll draw this up again, let's say I've got a gate here. Let's say these are my ley lines. So this would be coming in on port, and this would be coming in on starboard. Everyone can kind of see what I'm drawing there on your 2 downwind angles. We actually like to commit to a point X here, so we leave our options open. If we need to do a quick jog, we can pick the other mark. But if I'm all the way out here on ley line sailing in on port, I'm committed pretty much to this mark. So you want to prevent that, just like we were talking about upwind, about staying off those ley lines. If I've got the world coming in on me and I'm already committed to that mark, I have no other strategy other than to just come around all the boats that are coming into their backside, and you're going to lose a ton of boats that way. So very smart downwind sailing strategy is always try to leave yourself in a position here where when you get to the gate, you can still play either side. Does that make a lot of sense? So once we get here, we make that tactical decision about traffic and what we think the lifted or favored side is going to be exiting the gate. So as we come down here, we're like, oh, there's 3 boats over here, 10 boats over here, but there's maybe you're headed coming out of this gate. We're willing to come down here, and because we know we're headed, we'll come around and immediately tack onto the lift. Okay, these guys will all pile up even though they're going to be on the lift. Again, you're going to pick off a lot of boats, avoiding traffic. It's just like driving a car in Miami. You see everyone piling up in one lane, what do? You find a different lane. So in this, a lot of times, this is where the crews can be helpful downwind. Skippers are so focused on steering the boat to the angle downwind that they don't have time to look around. I know the crews are flying the kite, but somebody's got to make the assessment of what is my traffic going to look like as we enter into the gate. So there's no real order of operations. Obviously, with no one on the course, you want to go to the most upwind mark first, and then you want to immediately get on the lift, whichever it is coming out of the gate. We also have one other problem. We have all these boats coming down, so you're not going to be able to just easily cross over all the downwind boats coming down the course. So you're going to pretty much have to commit tactically to one side or the other and then also figure out the traffic situation in and out of the gates. It's a lot more complicated than your typical racing, but if you're good at it, analyzing and assessing the situation, you could pass a whole lot of boats. You can go from 30th to 15th, or whatever it is. You can pass 10, 15 boats by making the right calls in these situations. So today in practice, our course is going to be much shorter, even though we don't have the full 60 boats. We're going to have a great simulation of what's actually going to happen. We're actually going to kind of condense it in to make it very realistic compared to what we're going to see on the weekend. And our racing courses, even though we're only going to do 2 races, we're going to target something like a half an hour total race time. So your downwind's going to be like 7 minutes. It's going to be very short. Does anyone have any questions about the leeward gate?
When you drew that central mark when you're coming into the gate, how many boat lengths out from the gate?
So the point X, okay, if you think about it in light air, your angles are a lot hotter. So your point X is going to be a lot closer to the gate. Now in big breeze, we're sailing almost 15 degrees from dead downwind. Your point X is going to be a lot further up the course, okay? So you have to anticipate that in your strategy a little bit coming in. So let me talk about clear air and downwind a lot here coming into the gate. You actually can, just like coming up to a weather mark, let's say you're beneath ley line on starboard and a bunch of boats come in and start tacking on you. Sometimes it does make sense to do a hitch out and come to ley line early. If you have made the mistake of kind of pinning yourself into one mark, a lot of times keeping clear air as all the other boats start to cover each other can also come into play. It's a very similar type of strategy where if I'm coming in and I know I'm going to get into a lot of bad air, sometimes it makes sense to do 2 jives because you're already pretty much committed to the one mark anyways, and keep your clear air going just a little bit longer. But that's a judgment call out on the course. If you think by sailing straight you're just going to get into the huge dead spot because of everybody's spinnaker, then yeah, you could put that on the table and maybe consider doing 2 jives to stay all the way to ley line. So I'll talk about it for one moment just because it's so shifty on the lake. How does everybody determine your steering angle downwind?
The set of the jib downwind, so that you want to make sure that the jib is always full. You don't want the jib to flat.
So if your jib's trimmed right, what you're saying is you can steer as low as you can without the jib collapsing to weather. He's right, he's been to one of my clinics before. So what we're doing there is if you look at the flow over the sail, the spinnaker and the main and the jib, what happens when that jib collapses to weather is the wind's actually reversing itself across the spinnaker. Instead of the wind coming from the weather luff to the leeward luff, it's reversing, and that's showing you that suddenly you're actually stalling the spinnaker. So downwind, at least when you're driving the boat, you want to make sure your jib's trimmed correctly for the breeze, and usually that's just outside the rail. But just know you can't really force the boat much lower than that point at where the jib starts to collapse on itself. You can do it for a few bolt lengths, but if you had a kind of a speed GPS on board, you'd see your speed start to drop pretty quickly the second the jib collapses. So we're always looking at that for our angles downwind, and you can kind of do the math. Let's say on one jibe, you're 20 degrees up from dead downwind, flying that boundary layer. You know jibing, you're going to be looking at the same thing. So on your wind indicator, it tends to be where the tail of the wind indicator is pointing is almost your jibe angle. It's not exactly, but it's very close. Your apparent wind is moving that forward a little bit, the wind indicator, so it's actually angling almost to the exact jibe angle. You can either do the math, or you can kind of look at your wind indicator. We don't even sail with a wind indicator, so we're doing the math. If I'm 20 degrees up, I'm looking at what dead downwind is, and when I come around to the new jibe, I'm looking at where is my land sight 20 degrees above dead downwind. And that's kind of how we do it, and obviously coming out of the jibe, you're going to heat it up and then with pressure, bring it back down to keep your speed going the entire time. So we're using that to kind of get to that point X, like downwind. We're trying to sail in clear air with as much pressure as possible, and we're using our jib to determine our lower point of how deep we can sail the boat, and then finally we're using that geometry to figure out where our ley lines are. How many of you guys do that downwind instead of just sail the boat? So try doing that today in the clinic. Try to figure out those ley lines, because they're going to come at you pretty quickly on a 7-minute downwind. You're pretty much going to be setting, going for a minute or two, and then saying, "Are we on ley line?"
Wouldn't you also say, the wind speed would also have an impact on that decision? So
You're correct.
I think more on the light to medium wind, I would always want to make sure that the jib is right, but in heavy air, there might be situations where you can sail on the beat, you want to get up. What do you think about that?
What's interesting is in heavy air, we actually try to roll the boat to weather as much as possible, hiking it downwind, and we try to heat it up as much as possible where the jib's still the leeward. In doing so, you seem to pick up about 3 knots of speed, and then once the boat has that higher speed, you actually can bring it down with the pressure. So we find that the slowest mode to put the Scot in is almost where that jib's going to leeward and flopping. Okay, in lighter air, you want to sail as low as you can, but in heavy air, you want to be a little more liberal about gaining pressure and speed and then finding your lower boundary. We find that that's the fastest angle to sail the boat. And the interesting thing is, like, everyone's worried about rolling the boat to weather, sailing too deep, like broaching pretty much. All you've got to do is trim the main and head up a little, and you can come out of a pretty extreme weather heel. So a lot of times in 15 to 20 knots, we're trying to put the boat up like 7 to 10 degrees weather heel. And the way you kind of control the boat from rolling too much to weather is just trim that main. The boat's going to flatten immediately. And if you head up just a little, the boat's going to flatten, no problem. So we find our groove downwind kind of like that. And a lot of times you're semi-planing, if not planing. So we heat it up, get it up on a plane, and then because we're to weather, we actually track it down. And sometimes we get probably within 10 degrees of all the way dead downwind. We may see that on, Sunday, because in the back of the room.
Can you talk about board position in the line of heavy air?
Yeah, definitely. If you think about downwind, you don't want your boat side slipping to leeward. So in lighter air, because we're taking hotter angles, the board has to be much further down. And we actually pay attention. You could feel it. There's no exact way, because you've got to look at your trailing kind of line. And if you think you're tracking to leeward, slip it down a few inches. So you know how we kind of sail the boat either heel to leeward or heel to weather downwind? A lot of times when we're in our leeward mode, we want to make sure that blade is down. And when we kind of have enough pressure to send it deeper in that weather mode, we're probably 80–90% of the way up. We want to reduce the drag at that point as much as possible. So if we're changing modes, let's say I'm from weather and I hit a big lull and we decide to change to leeward mode, we're going to take that blade and probably drop it a good 15–20 degrees down, changing modes. Same thing, if you're sailing the leeward and you're pretty deep with your blade, suddenly you have the pressure to kind of come to that weather mode, you're going to pick it up 20 degrees. And it's very dynamic. We're actually playing the blade quite a bit downwind. And PJ and I do something very different. I actually fly the spinnaker downwind because it allows PJ to call tactics, pressure, and play the blade. So I'm typically in the back of the boat, like almost sailing at like a 49er, where I've got the tiller in one hand, and then I'm turned around where I've got the leeward guy sheet in the other hand. And I'm kind of like walking around the boat like a giant surfboard, where if I feel it's a little stagnant, I'll put my weight to leeward against the bench, lean down, heat it up at the same time. PJ will drop the blade, we'll change our angle, get pressure built, and then as we want to flatten, we're doing the opposite. I'll go ahead and ease the kite, flatten the boat, and then PJ will pick the blade up at the same time. So we're always talking to each other about how the boat's feeling, sailing, but good question. A lot of nuance to the downwind. But one of the things we see in the big fleets is it's easy to get in the down mode. Watch your jibs. definitely pay attention to how your jibs are sailing off the wind. Crews, back your skippers up on this, because a lot of times they're so focused on other boats around them that they go into that mode where the kite stalls and the jib collapses. Stay out of that area.
Clarifying question for you. When you say to windward and to leeward of the down there, you mean to wheel the boat?
Yes.
Going to windward?
Yep.
So when you're wheeling it to windward, the kite is more for the air.
Yeah, you square the kite. Yeah.
Square the kite, then the board goes down for that.
Yep. No, board comes up.
Board comes up.
Yep.
When you're wheeling it to leeward, then you put the board on each side.
Yeah. And I'm also changing my weather guy position a lot.
Sure. Yeah.
So when we go into that heat up, I actually run my cleats back to the inside of the bench.
Yeah.
So I can change the pull, so PJ doesn't have to, there's no communication issue there. And yeah, we change gears a lot downwind. You can also change gears to stay out of bad air. If we think that there's a big dead spot because there's a bunch of boats, we'll go ahead and either try to go into a low mode or even heat it up to play the pressure and what the other boats are doing. A lot of times we do more jives than most people downwind, especially if we're not up there. And we'll use those jives to kind of stay in those clear lanes and maximize our pressure, try to pass boats that way. Any other questions about downwind modal sailing? So we've got about 10 minutes to 11 here. I've got to go, I think Ray's got the cover off. So there's two boats out there. There's a red and a gray boat. We're probably going to use the gray boat as the demo boat. I'm going to pull it so we've got enough room for everyone to kind of camp around the boat. And I'll show you guys, because I've rigged that boat, the systems that are in it, why we made the changes to it, and where you want to kind of put everything on your boat. Trying to think of anything here. So we'll probably take a 10-minute water break here if anyone needs to use it. Go ahead.
Put it in registration. There's be drone flying there or anything like that?
Yes, so this afternoon when we go out and we do our practice starts and practice races, PJ's got his DJI, so we're going to film from interesting vantage points where at the start we can show you that line stack because we can position the drone to where you can see not only the line but the positioning of every boat. Okay? The other thing we can do with the drone is as you're sailing upwind, we actually can come look at your leach profiles. We can see how you're sailing in the boat, and during any of the boat handling, we can see everything that you're doing. It's filmed in 4K, so at the end of the day here, when we come off the water, we're going to put the drone footage up on the big monitor and allow everyone to kind of peek at what boats are doing out on the water. We also have some previous videos that we made loop in, but the idea is that we can't get everybody on film, but we will cover the race as if you were kind of covering it for showing it on TV. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the entire start probably from the boat end, and then as boats start to break, we're probably going to follow what we think is the lead pack. Okay, we want to see what strategies they're doing upwind. And then as we get toward the weather ley line, we're going to back off those leaders and cover the convergence that's going to happen with what we were talking about here, with the ley lines, the bad air, the boat handling, everything in that dimension. So once we get to weather, we're really going to be following more or less the middle of the pack, because we're trying to capture those strategy decisions and see how boats are making those decisions based on ley line and traffic and things like that. Because following the leaders, they're just going to separate because they're in clear air. We think the really valuable information is showing everyone in the fleet who really got screwed over, who really made out, like that type of thing. And we think we can capture that better on the drone than even whiteboarding like we're doing now. So we'll have some real world examples of someone short tacking a ley line and getting stuck, and hopefully we get it all on there. Once that pack's kind of rounded, we're going to zoom to the leeward gate and capture the fleet coming in. Again, we kind of ignore the leaders there because they're in and out of the gate pretty quick, and there's probably not a whole lot to be learned from them. So we're going to try to capture, again, the middle of the fleet to show all that traffic and how those situations play out of the course. So that's what we're going to do with the drone. All right, 5 minutes, 10 minutes here to grab some water, maybe bathroom, and I'll meet you guys out at the boat.